Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Saturday, April 18th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 79.3 degrees with a low of 52.8. It will be a mild and pleasant day for anyone spending time outdoors. Moving on to our top stories, we examine the escalating tension between Donald Trump and Jerome Powell and why some legal scholars are calling the standoff a constitutional crisis. We also look into the disciplinary actions taken against medical professionals in Texas following the tragic loss of 2 pregnant patients. We will cover these stories in depth and discuss several other important events shaping our world today. There is a lot to get to, so stay tuned for all of this and more on Alex's News. We start this morning with a story that legal scholars are calling an unprecedented constitutional crisis. The standoff between the White House and the Federal Reserve is reaching a breaking point with a critical deadline now less than a month away. Ethan has been following every twist in this saga. Ethan, where do things stand today?
Grace, as of today, April 18th, we are exactly 27 days from what could be a defining moment for American economic governance. President Trump has drawn a hard line in the sand around May 15th, the date Jerome Powell's term as Fed chair officially expires. According to Fox Business and ABC News, the president has issued a public ultimatum telling Powell to vacate his seat on the Board of Governors by that date or face termination. What makes this so explosive is that Powell isn't just fighting for his job. He's fighting over whether the Federal Reserve stays independent from the White House.
But wait, if his chairmanship ends May 15th, why is there even a fight?
That's the key distinction a lot of people are missing. Powell's title as chair expires in May, but his statutory term as a member of the Board of Governors is a 14-year appointment that doesn't run out until January 2028. He's signaled he intends to stay on as what's called a holdover governor, essentially to act as a guardrail against political interference. In response, the president has launched a pretty aggressive pressure campaign, calling the Fed, quote, corrupt, end quote, and, quote, incompetent, end quote, in multiple public addresses.
So the White House isn't just relying on rhetoric. There's also a criminal investigation, right?
That's right, and it's a big part of the strategy. The Department of Justice has opened a criminal investigation into the Fed's headquarters renovation. We're talking about 2 buildings. The Mariner S. Eccles building and the 1951 Constitution Avenue building. The Washington Post and Mexico Business News report that the project's costs have ballooned from an initial $1.9 billion to roughly $2.5 billion. U.S. Attorney Jeanine Pirro is leading the probe and has characterized those $600 million in overruns as, quote, criminal incompetence, end quote.
$600 million in overruns does sound alarming. Is there another side to that story?
There really is, and independent watchdogs have pushed back hard. According to construction owners and SSB Crack, both the Fed's Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have reviewed those numbers. They've characterized the cost increases as pretty standard for complex historic renovations. The overruns stem from hazardous material remediation. We're talking asbestos and lead, a notoriously high water table in D.C.'s Foggy Bottom neighborhood, and inflation in construction materials. So the picture the DOJ is painting doesn't necessarily line up with what the oversight bodies found.
And a federal judge weighed in on this too, didn't he?
He did, and his language was striking. On March 11th, Chief Judge James Boasberg of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia quashed the DOJ's subpoenas. He said the government had produced, quote, essentially zero evidence, end quote, of a crime. The Guardian reports that Judge Boasberg went even further, describing the entire investigation as a, quote, pretext, end quote, to pressure the Fed into lowering interest rates. That's a sitting federal judge essentially accusing the executive branch of weaponizing a criminal probe for monetary policy goals.
Meanwhile, there's a Supreme Court case that could change everything. What's happening with Trump versus Cook?
This is really the legal linchpin of the whole crisis. Back in August 2025, President Trump tried to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook over alleged mortgage fraud. Lower courts blocked that move. Now, according to SCOTUS blog and Al Jazeera, the administration is arguing that the for-cause protection written into the Federal Reserve Act is unconstitutional. That protection is what prevents a president from firing governors simply because they disagree on policy. The White House wants at-will firing power, similar to what the court established in Sela Law, LLC versus CFPB.
When are we expecting a ruling on that?
The court is expected to hand down its decision in late June 2026. Until then, lower court injunctions have effectively frozen the president's ability to summarily dismiss board members. That makes any attempt to fire Powell before May 15th legally precarious at best. So there's this strange limbo where the White House has the desire to act but not yet the legal green light to do so.
Let's talk about the person Trump wants in Powell's seat. What's happening with the Kevin Warsh nomination?
It's paralyzed right now. NPR and the New York Times report that Republican Senator Thom Tillis has vowed to block any successor until the DOJ wraps up what he's called an, quote, absurd, end quote, investigation into Powell. So ironically, a member of the president's own party is standing in the way. Without Tillis, the math for Senate confirmation just doesn't work, and the nomination is stuck in a holding pattern.
What kind of Fed chair would Warsh be if he did get confirmed?
He'd represent a pretty dramatic philosophical shift. The Wall Street Journal reports that Warsh has advocated for what he calls a, quote, regime change, end quote, at the Fed. His argument is that an AI-driven productivity boom will be naturally disinflationary, which would justify lower interest rates. That lines up neatly with President Trump's pro-growth agenda. Powell, by contrast, has stuck to his data-dependent approach, keeping rates elevated to combat persistent inflation driven largely by geopolitical instability. So you'd be going from a cautious, data-first leader to someone with a much bolder ideological framework.
Presidents pressuring the Fed isn't entirely new, though, is it?
No, and the Washington Post and Federal Reserve history have documented some pretty jaw-dropping precedents. In 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson famously shoved Chair William McChesney Martin against a wall at his Texas ranch, demanding lower rates to fund the Vietnam War. Then Richard Nixon successfully pressured Arthur Burns to juice the economy before the 1972 election, and that directly led to the Great Inflation of the 1970s. The lesson from that era is what ultimately produced the 1951 Treasury-Fed Accord under President Truman, which formally established the Fed's independence from the executive branch. What we're watching now could unravel that very framework.
And the economic backdrop right now makes all of this even more high stakes. What's the global picture?
It's rough. CNN and Mexico Business News report that the 2026 U.S.-Iran war, which began on February 28th, has kept Brent oil futures above $96 a barrel. That complicates the Fed's inflation mandate enormously. There is a fragile ceasefire that was brokered in April, but market volatility remains high. So the Fed is navigating wartime economics while simultaneously fending off a political assault on its independence.
What are investors doing in the middle of all this uncertainty?
They're running to safety. Gold prices have surged to nearly $4,839 an ounce as investors hedge against both the conflict and the potential loss of Fed independence. Economists interviewed by The Street warn that if markets perceive the Fed is acting under political duress, inflation expectations will climb. That would trigger bond market volatility and could cause serious long-term economic instability. It's not just about one interest rate decision. It's about whether the institution's credibility survives.
So take us to May 16th. Powell's chairmanship has expired. Warsh isn't confirmed. What actually happens?
This is where it gets really procedurally interesting. CBS News and Cornell Law Resources outline a few scenarios. First, the Board of Governors could vote to keep Powell as chair pro tempore, as long as he remains a sitting governor. Second, under the Fed's rules of organization, if the chair is considered absent, Vice Chair Philip Jefferson would step in, or failing that, the senior-most governor, either Christopher Waller or Michelle Bowman. The Financial Times also reports that White House advisors are exploring whether the Federal Open Market Committee could be pressured to elect a new leader, though the FOMC has historically remained insulated from that kind of political maneuvering. None of these options are clean, and all of them would be challenged.
So we're really looking at a collision of constitutional proportions here.
That's exactly the phrase legal scholars are using. The outcome of Trump versus Cook and the resolution of the DOJ probe will determine whether the Federal Reserve remains an independent arbiter of monetary policy or effectively becomes an extension of the executive branch. The next few weeks leading up to May 15th are going to be critical, and then the Supreme Court ruling in late June could reshape the balance of power for generations.
Ethan, thanks for walking us through all of that. We'll certainly keep following this one closely. Still ahead, we've got one more story to get to this morning. We move now to our second story this morning, and it's a difficult one. The Texas Medical Board has sanctioned 3 doctors after 2 pregnant women died, following what investigators called substandard and delayed care. Chloe has been following this closely. Chloe, what exactly did the board find?
So the Texas Medical Board finalized what are called agreed orders against 3 physicians. Those doctors are Dr. William Noel Hawkins, Dr. Ali Muhammad Osman, and Dr. Andrew Ryan Davis. ProPublica first broke this story, and it's since been picked up by CNN, the Texas Tribune, ABC News, and CBS News. The board determined that all 3 provided care it labeled substandard and delayed, and that care contributed to the deaths of 2 women, Neve Crane and Portia Ngumezi, back in 2023.
Let's start with Neve Crane. She was only 18 years old. What happened to her?
Neve Crane was 6 months pregnant when she visited emergency rooms 3 separate times in a single day. She had severe abdominal pain and fever. On her first visit to Baptist hospitals of Southeast Texas, Dr. Ali Muhammad Osman diagnosed her with strep throat and sent her home with antibiotics. He never investigated her pregnancy complications or assessed the fetus. It's hard to overstate how significant that missed opportunity was, because things escalated rapidly from there.
And her second visit wasn't much better?
Not at all. She went to Christus, Southeast Texas Street, Elizabeth, where Dr. William Noel Hawkins saw her. At that point, according to ProPublica, Crane had a 103-degree fever, signs of sepsis, and the fetus had an abnormally high heart rate. Despite all of those red flags, Dr. Hawkins discharged her. The board later stated explicitly that his delay in care, quote, resulted in the death of both the patient and her unborn child, end quote.
So by the time she came back a third time, it was too late?
Essentially, yes. By her third visit, Crane was already in organ failure. But here's the detail that's really driven the national conversation. Hospital records obtained by ProPublica show that doctors delayed a life-saving procedure for 90 minutes. They were waiting for a second ultrasound to confirm the fetal heartbeat had stopped. Medical experts say that precaution was taken to ensure compliance with Texas's strict abortion laws. Neve Crane died shortly after the procedure was finally performed.
That 90-minute delay is staggering. Now tell us about Portia Ngumezi.
Portia Ngumezi was 35 years old and 11 weeks pregnant when she suffered a miscarriage at Houston Methodist Sugar Land Hospital. She was hemorrhaging and passing large blood clots. The clinical standard for a life-threatening hemorrhage like that is an immediate dilation and curettage, commonly called a D&C. But Dr. Andrew Ryan Davis chose instead to administer misoprostol, which is a medication more appropriate for early-stage, lower-risk miscarriages.
Why would he choose a less effective treatment in an emergency?
That's the central question here. Medical experts interviewed by the Texas Tribune and ProPublica pointed out that the D&C procedure is heavily associated with abortion. It's under intense legal scrutiny in Texas. The implication is that Dr. Davis may have opted for the pill to avoid the legal exposure that comes with performing a D&C. The Texas Medical Board ruled that he failed to quantify Ngumezi's blood loss or act with the necessary urgency. Portia Ngumezi bled to death.
So what penalties are these doctors actually facing from the board?
This is where a lot of the criticism is centered. All 3 must complete 8 hours of extra training within 1 year. They're also required to inform current and future employers about the board's findings of substandard care. The board holds the authority to issue administrative fines up to $5,000. The doctors neither admitted nor denied the findings as part of these agreed orders. Family representatives have called the sanctions a, quote, slap in the face, end quote, arguing that 8 hours of education is an insufficient response to preventable deaths.
8 hours of training after 2 women died. Does Dr. Hawkins have any prior history with the board?
He does, actually. Dr. William Noel Hawkins is an OB/GYN who had a prior disciplinary record. He was sanctioned back in 2015 for failing to diagnose a syphilis infection. So this is not the first time the board has found his care lacking, which makes the relatively light penalty here even more striking to critics.
Now, you mentioned Texas's abortion laws played a role in these delays. Can you walk us through that legal landscape?
Sure. In Texas, doctors face up to 99 years in prison and the loss of their medical licenses for performing abortions unless the mother's life is at risk. According to NPR and CNN, those severe penalties have created what's widely described as a chilling effect. Physicians fear that providing standard of care treatments for miscarriages or sepsis could be prosecuted as illegal abortions. That fear appears to be exactly what drove the 90-minute delay in Nevia Crane's case and the treatment decision in Portia and Gomez's.
Texas did try to address this legislatively, right? With the Life of the Mother Act?
They did. Texas passed the Life of the Mother Act, also known as SB 31, and it went into effect on June 20th, 2025. So that was about 10 months ago today. The law removed the requirement that a threat to the mother's life be imminent. It defined life-threatening as a condition, quote, capable of causing death, end quote. And it shifted the burden of proof to the state to show that no reasonable physician would have acted similarly. On paper, those are meaningful changes.
But critics aren't convinced it goes far enough?
Not at all. The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, known as ACOG, calls the law, quote, exception deception, end quote. Their argument is straightforward. As long as criminal penalties remain on the books, doctors will continue to prioritize legal self-preservation over the medical standard of care. You can clarify exceptions all you want, but the threat of 99 years in prison still looms over every emergency decision.
The board seems to be saying these were individual failures, not a systemic problem. Is that how others see it?
That's the board's official position. They concluded that the treatments withheld, things like sepsis protocols and emergency D&Cs, are explicitly permitted under state law. So in their view, these doctors simply failed as clinicians. But legal analysts and advocacy groups interviewed by ProPublica argue the state is scapegoating individual physicians to deflect criticism from the abortion ban itself. They say the board is penalizing doctors for the exact hesitation the state's laws were designed to induce. It's a deeply uncomfortable contradiction.
And this isn't just happening in Texas, is it?
No, it's not. The New York Times has highlighted similar delays in other states. One prominent case involved Amber Thurman in Georgia, where doctors delayed a routine D&C for 20 hours until she went into septic shock. ProPublica's investigative series, called Life of the Mother, has now linked 7 specific maternal deaths across the country to delays caused by state abortion bans. Those include Crane, Gumezi, Thurman, and Gisele Barnica, among others.
Are there numbers that show this is getting worse in Texas specifically?
There are. Data analysis shows that in Texas alone, sepsis rates for women hospitalized with second trimester pregnancy loss surged by more than 50% after the state's ban took effect. That's a dramatic increase, and it strongly suggests the problem is systemic, rather than a handful of bad doctors making isolated mistakes.
What about the families? Are they pursuing legal action?
Both families are. Nevia Crane's family has filed a wrongful death and medical malpractice lawsuit against Dr. Osman, Dr. Hawkins, and their respective hospitals. Portia and Gomez's husband, Hope Ngumezi, filed suit against Dr. Davis and Houston Methodist Sugarland back in June of 2025. The board's findings of substandard care are powerful evidence for those lawsuits.
But there's a catch with the new law, isn't there?
There is, and it's significant. SB 31 reclassifies these cases as healthcare liability claims. That subjects them to Texas's $250,000 cap on non-economic damages. So even if the families prevail in court, their compensation for pain and suffering is legally capped. It's another layer of frustration for families who feel the sanctions were already woefully inadequate.
Chloe, this is such an important story. Thank you for walking us through all of it.
Thank you, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. Tensions in the Strait of Hormuz have reached a boiling point as of April 18, 2026. Iran's military command is trying to go with the flow by reimposing strict controls on the waterway, a direct response to the ongoing United States naval blockade of Iranian ports. While a convoy of liquefied petroleum gas and chemical tankers managed to wade through the trouble on Saturday, vessel tracking data shows a tidal wave of commercial ships from Maersk and CMACGM performing U-turns to avoid the standoff. Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf is making waves, warning that this corridor, which carries roughly 20% of global oil, will remain bottled up unless the Americans lift their restrictions. United States Central Command reports that at least 21 vessels have been forced to turn tail since the blockade began on April 13th. This high-stakes game of battleship has global energy markets feeling crude, with international stakeholders from China to the European Union pushing for a permanent maritime security mission to prevent a total meltdown of the oil supply chain. Moving south, it seems there is a new spark in Havana as a United States delegation touched down for the first government flight to the island outside of Guantanamo Bay since 2016. Our diplomats are hoping to bridge the digital divide with Raul Guillermo Rodriguez Castro, the grandson and advisor to the retired leader, seeking a cigar-typically flavored deal for economic reform. The proposal on the table is quite the web of intrigue, providing Cuba with free, reliable Starlink satellite internet in exchange for the release of political prisoners and a liberalization of the economy. While Secretary of State Marco Rubio was not on this particular flight, he has been laying the groundwork in secret talks since February. President Trump has suggested a new dawn for the island, pivoting from previous threats to a more deal-making approach that aims to connect the dots on long-standing regional security issues. In the halls of justice, a long story has come to an abrupt end. Maria Meditis Long, the lead federal prosecutor in the criminal investigation of former CIA Director John Brennan, has been removed from the case. Long reportedly felt the legal strength of the charges was a bit thin and resisted pressure to fast-track an indictment. This legal shakeup follows the installation of Todd Blanche as acting attorney general after the firing of Pam Bondi. Now Chris DeLorenz is stepping into the witness stand of this investigation, which focuses on whether Brennan was being honest with Congress about the Steele dossier during a 2025 referral by Jim Jordan. It is a real trial of nerves, as political appointees and career prosecutors clash, though United States Attorney Jason Redding Quinones suggests an indictment could be coming soon. Switching channels to business news, a massive media merger has hit a wall of static. Chief Judge Troy L. Nunley has issued a preliminary injunction to block the $6.2 billion union between Nexstar Media Group and Tegna Incorporated. Critics were worried this broadcast behemoth would have too much reach, controlling the remote in 80% of American households across 44 states. New York Attorney General Letitia James argued the deal would lead to a signal failure for competition, potentially hiking cable bills for 10 million consumers. For now, Nexstar must keep Tegna on a separate frequency while the legal battle continues. Finally, Live Nation is trying to change its tune by supporting two California bills designed to overhaul the ticket market. Assembly Bill 1720 and Assembly Bill 1349 aim to put a lid on resale markups at 10% and ban speculative ticketing. While some say this is a front-row seat to better consumer protection, others fear it is just a way for the company to maintain a solo act in the industry following an April 15 ruling that found them to be an illegal monopoly. This legislative push is a noteworthy attempt to regain public favor while the company faces heavy penalties. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.